move on?
Yeah, man. Lead us.
All right. Topic number dos. As our viewer count fluctuates. I know you're not supposed to watch it, but it's so pronounced. I wish I could just bury it so I don't have to see it. Um, Topic number two is a hot button issue for me that has nothing to do with really historical issues like indigenous folk and a lot to do with contemporary society, which I think is a fucking shit show. Let me just open with that preamble. I think where we're at as a society
theoretical contribution
is fucking absurd. So I was the unfortunate victim this weekend of stumbling across a tweet. Yes, that is how it needs to be phrased. Of stumbling across a tweet from Tyga promoting his OnlyFans. Now, upon further review, without giving this motherfucker any of my money, it is about as bad a representation of the platform and all of the problems that are coming to fruition as a result of it entering the public discourse as you could ever conceive of. Right? You could be like a marketing and advertising brain trust trying to figure out like what's the worst promo we can do for our service. This is it. This is exactly what it is. The image is him surrounded. He's in like a beater, some shorts, some socks, and some slides, I think, if I remember correctly. And he is flanked on every direction but his own crotch by completely naked women.
Mm-hmm.
And all it says...
And to be clear, like, it's not just like, oh, they're nude. Like, we're seeing all the bits and pieces. Like, people are, like, bent over.
Yeah, it's not like,
in the shot.
Oh, full frontal nudity with, like, crossed legs or, like, strategic positioning and hand coverings. No, everything is exposed. There's even a fair amount of, like, pseudo cunnilingus being performed on one side of the image, right? Like
there was no pseudo, bro. There was
whenever it's a photo, it's probably pretty staged. Did it probably happen afterwards or before? Bro. Probably. I don't know. In any event, all the fucking tweet says is a link to his OnlyFans. So from jump, the problems begin. Why? Because not a single one of the women that is depicted in the image is being tagged, right? Whether they have a Twitter of their own, an Instagram, OnlyFans of their own, nothing. Not a fucking word about who they are or where they came from. Right? Come to find out, you go on the website, this motherfucker's charging $20 a month for Lord knows what, because again, I'm not giving him my money, even for 1 month, just to find out what the fuck is going on in there. $20. This coming.
We'll give somebody a crisp high five if they bring.
This coming from a well-established hip hop artist who gained increased notoriety as a result of impregnating a fucking Kardashian. Like, did I miss anything? Do you need more claims to fame? Do you? Your name has never left conversation. It's not possible with those connections.
Oh my god.
So naturally, everyone's first inclination is this is the worst fucking cash grab we've ever seen. Right?
Yeah, bro.
There are models who verifiably having posted their own screen caps and receipts are cashing in 60 plus G's a month with discounted subscriptions that are peaking at like $6.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And they, their promos are full nude. Not just the content that's on the page, but the promo posts on Twitter are full nude. Right? There's always a little bit of some sauce on the site when you go. That's like, here's a little appetizer. Please subscribe to this thing. Giving out free spots to encourage people to stay subscribed. Right?
Yep.
And this asshole has the audacity to be like, yo, 20 bones. And then he has a free page, apparently, that I also just discovered today. A free page where there's a couple images that you would see, back in the day if you were scouring like BET Plus or whatever to find the fucking Tiptro video and it plays at like 12:30 at night, right? Like the original super sketchy like pornographic music video.
12-minute long. Yeah, that joint was
right?
Wild. I think it's still wild. I think Tiptro has aged well. in that it was so outlandish when it came out that like nothing has touched it.
No,
No,
not even a little bit.
And it built, and I literally have this in my notes. The only other video that, like the video that I think held the bar prior to Tip Drill was Uchiwali, and that mostly
I also
because of
thought the
how
same thing.
ridiculous
I forgot to put that in the notes, but
the
I thought
hook to that song is.
both of those, and I was like, yep, these are the only two that I can think of, right? But this motherfucker has a free page with a $20 paywall for all the stuff that isn't shown, that isn't like any more explicit than an album cover would be, and then a $10 paywall to tip if you want to see it in quotations eggplant emoji. Whether or not he shows his dick, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't really want to find out. I'm not interested. Can honestly say there's nothing about him that would remotely interest me. I don't understand the allure. Why did this irk me so much? The way I have it written in the notes is that we have entered a stage in society where the meme-ification of OnlyFans has become a thing. It is a meme. If you saw the promo post that I put on the gram, it was a literal meme of a kid crying in class, and the caption says, you know, when it's career day and your mom pulls out a laptop and a webcam. And when those are the jokes that are being made, you know that we've reached a very, very critical tipping point in how we view this platform and what it's doing to social conversation. I was recently watching the show Woke on Hulu, which is a dope show, by the way. You should totally watch it. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And there's a point in one of the episodes where one of the characters, Clovis, makes a joke about his OnlyFans where all he does is eat cereal. It's cereal ASMR, basically. And their other roommate, the one white roommate, Gunther, who's an actor on Workaholics from back in the day, is like, I don't know, man, you just make it look so good. Like, I understand when people pay you money to do this. Like, it doesn't matter what you're eating. Every cereal looks delicious. And like I got the joke, right? But it irked me. Because I'm like, we have to have a serious conversation about independent content creators, where the platform started, who it was targeted at, like who its target producer audience was, not consumer audience, and where we're going now. Because increasingly, you have more and more celebrities jumping on the bandwagon. You had Bella Thorne, who fucked up the platform from jump.
Yeah, we talked about that last week.
You had Cardi B, who came on and was like, listen, I've already shown my titties for money, so this ain't nothing new. I don't have to charge a lot of money for it because I know what the deal is, right? Now you have Tyga. Mia Khalifa recently started one, right? Mm-hmm. But it's nothing of like an incredibly nude or sexual variety. It's all like her modeling the way that she was prior, but now she's, you know, taking her own subscription cut off of it, right? Never mind all the shit she's had to go through with her, you know, very, very, very short-lived adult video career, right? That got blown way out of proportion. And so it has a lot to do with our other following conversation about the gig economy, but you know, one of the things that I've been toying with is that like OnlyFans as like a meme is really problematic for those people who are using it as their primary source of income, who don't have a lot of outlets for financial success, who don't have a lot of outlets for flexibility in their economic endeavors because of any sort of predispositions they may have, any sort of, you know, health conditions that they have to deal with, any sort of social, psychological issues that they feel with being in a traditional workplace, any of the inequalities that make it hard to get a fucking job.
Right? Well, just like, yo, you got laid off because of COVID, and you're trying to hustle the bits and pieces.
But even that one is difficult. Even that one's is problematic, and this is one of the things that has been referenced as quote unquote survival sex work, right? Where a lot of people were like, "Well, I heard that so and so was on OnlyFans, and you know, like they're making all this money, so I figured, oh, I can do it too." Right. And there's like this crazy misconception that it's just a cakewalk to be like, "Yo, I just show my bitties, and money just comes flowing at me," right? And it's like, yeah, you might be like quantitatively attractive, right? We may be able to put your shit on a scale and be like, yes, statistically speaking, if we polled the entirety of the country, you would be attractive, right? But that does not necessarily mean that anybody wants to see your shit, nor does it mean that you are capable of marketing your shit in a way that people want to consume, right? Like, you could be absolutely fire. You could be the hottest individual on the fucking planet. But if you don't know how to position a camera, you don't know how to light, your marketing game is trash. You don't know how to operate Twitter, right? Like, picture like a 50-year-old dime piece. Right? How in God's name is any individual from that generation going to be like, yo, Twitter? I'm going to have people subscribe? Like, somebody
could... You got to hire a team. Because I know that they're 50-year-olds who are hustling.
Right. But then you got to have capital to hire somebody to manage your shit.
Right.
Which adds a whole extra layer to the problem with the platform, right? So on the one hand, there's a very basic issue of like this illusion of ease that comes with this work, right? That everybody thinks it's just a fucking cakewalk, and any sap could figure it out. And I think that's where like my point of focus, I think, for our conversation starts, right? Like, I just don't understand how anyone looks at any job where you are the thing that needs to be the product, right? And you think that it's easy. Like, has creative careers of any flavor historically like not been an indication that shit is hard?
Yeah.
Do people not look at actors, artists, musicians and be like, oh, like the mass majority of them don't fucking make it?
I mean, it's like the industry itself is precarious, right? And here it's, I mean, just like, so like the like entertainment as a broad nucleus I mean, it's precarious work. Like, just however we might feel about that, it's hard to make a break in that industry and in those fields. And I think that and in some ways, Herbie, I think, like, you know, this piece about OnlyFans and it's almost impossible to not jump into the piece about the gig economy, because I think so much of this comes from the fact that we live in the era of neoliberalism, right? Where every decision you make has to be economized, where everything has to is reducible to some kind of like economic rationality. And then the precariousness of the gig economy, right, is like you're an independent contractor, so the platform's always going to take their cut, and whether you make it or not, it doesn't fucking matter to them. And like, when we take out like the sort of like moralizing of sex work, think about Uber, right? Like, people think that it's just hand over fist money, but when you consider the increasing depreciation of your vehicle with every trip, when you consider that drunken undergrad who tosses their cookies in the back of your whip, when you consider how much gas you spend, when you consider how much more predisposed you are to a car accident, right? Like all of a sudden you start to realize that you're making like pennies on the dollar for how much it actually costs you to do the work, right? And when we peel away the Mia Khalifas and the Lexi Panteras and whatever, folks who've successfully like economized themselves elsewhere, and OnlyFans becomes like a logical extension of an already established brand, you see that this is like really, really precarious and difficult work. And in Tyga's case, what I find so repulsive is how exploitative it so clearly is. How exploitative it so clearly is, right? Because I like, don't get me wrong, like I have no interest in Tyga in any way, shape, or form, but I would feel different if he's showing his cock. And in part because the impression that we get from the image on Twitter is he's created a platform to make money on the work of other people, right? And one of the reasons that it reminds me so much of Uchiwali, right, is like that there's that entourage of artists who are clearly like the agentic subjects of that video, and we're left with this impression that these women are a dime a dozen, that they're replaceable. None of them have any speaking lines, and all of the lyrics to the songs, to the whole song, are like blur the lines between like the violent and the erotic. And however we might feel about that song, right, we're left with the impression that these women are replaceable, and they're just subject to the artists in this production. And yes, that pitch is a fantasy, but here we're actually talking about work. We're talking about people's work, right? And I would love to see like what kind of compensation, if any, is afoot for the women who are featured on his OnlyFans. What kind of contractual obligations, if any, are there between him and the people whose work, whose bodies, whose labor is actually drawing traffic and revenue to his page? And so like, and that's the part that really fucking chaps my ass, is if Tyga wants to make an OnlyFans where he's flashing his dick, cool, whatever, bro, do you. But that's not the impression that I have. That's not the impression that I have. And I think I am curious, and I would give a crisp high five to anybody who's willing to do a little ethnographic deep dive for us, because I would like to see some of the deeper content, right? Like the image draws you in, right? It's like reminiscent of like, you know, the Big Pimpin' video in 1999, right? Holding that big yacht and all of these beautiful women everywhere, right? It plays on a particular fantasy. And I think that that's the other piece that I'd be curious to know about is, like, what's his clientele? Who's he drawing in? You know, first of all, I never. This is coming to me in real time, so
yeah,
bear
no,
with me.
I'm with it.
I never thought that I'd be quoting or referencing Tiger King in this project, but here goes. You know that? Have you seen it?
Yeah, seen the whole thing, and the after episode, yeah.
So when he's talking to his soon-to-be paramour, and it's like, when you like watching porn, do you want the guy to have a little dick or a big dick? A big dick, right? Well, I guess you're not that straight. Like, I'm wondering here if there's like a homoerotics to Tyga's OnlyFans that's there, right?
1000%.
And the playing up of the hypermasculine misogynist fantasy by proxy that this allows, right? In the same way that, and we've talked about this in multiple episodes, right? Like, this user generated like sex work creates the illusion of proximity, right? I'm paying for this. I'm paying for intimacy. And so I'm wondering if we're seeing a confluence of that, right? Like the proximity of user generated content allows his subscribers to live out this hyper masculine misogynist fantasy by proxy in a way that like content on like produced pornographic content does. Like, it's titillating and exciting, but it doesn't give us that proximity that allows you to imagine yourself as the Mac Daddy with the yacht and the 30 nameless biddies who are just at your disposal.
I think you're totally right about the homoerotics, and I would say that 1000% there is something there to be said about that allure of closeness, that veneer of like, I am paying to get as close to this experience as I can get, because I idolize this individual to some extent. I want to be them. They are a picture of masculinity that I wish I could embody, right? And so, like, while on the one hand, I'm sure a male consumer would vehemently protest against, you know, their desire to see his dick, they'd be like, but on the other hand, like, yeah, I want to see him, you know, fucking all these girls that he paid for or whatever, right? Like, it's gonna make me feel better, and then they're gonna also then subconsciously hope that his dick is huge, right? Because they'll be like, yeah, that's what I thought. Like, that's the life I want to live, right? And so there's totally something there, I think, even with, you know, Joe Exotic and all his crazy bullshit, right? Like, there is something there. I'm 99% sure that if you were to poll a bunch of cis hetero dudes who watch porn on a regular basis, they'd be like, yeah, you know, I'm always like looking for the guy who looks like he knows what he's doing. And it's like, well, so that means he has a big dick, right? They're like, they may not say it in those terms, but that's what they mean, right? Because there is a desire there. It's not enjoyable to consume otherwise, right? It doesn't speak to their proclivities, doesn't speak to their experience or what they feel like they want to be consuming. And so on the flip, right, whether or not he's showing anything, it begs the question, like, what is the space for men on the platform? I'm not saying that men shouldn't use it, but a male celebrity brings a whole different veneer of problems to it than a female celebrity using it. in part because the mass majority of sex workers who are using the platform are women or non-binary or transgender, um, and as a result, right, there's been this discussion, and this was a question issued on another podcast that I listened to, right, about like what men get to bring to the table and whether or not it's anything anybody wants.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so like the example they were using was like, oh, dudes like showing their hands on like an OnlyFans, starting out OnlyFans for your hands, and like showing them to the camera and like putting sauce and shit on them for people who are into that stuff or whatever.
Bro, someone you know someone who will remain nameless who was into that.
Right, and so it's not to say there isn't a market there, right? But their logic was like, well, it's so much easier for women because women have more quote unquote body parts, which gets into a whole other issue of the sexualization of organs that, you know, like have nothing to do with sex, really.
Right.
And so there's this weird question of like the involvement of men on the platform and whether or not it's just like another step in overtaking a space that really wasn't meant for them, was targeted at them, I think, inherently.
As consumers.
And as consumers, and now they've realized that they need to be on the other end of it in order to control how the content is being made so that they could feel better about consuming it. It's a little ass backwards, I think, the way that I'm explaining it, right? But like,
I think I follow.
Like it's concerning to me because it's just not prevalent, right? And so to have a man come on and then to do exactly what you would expect a man to do, which is not be putting himself on display, but instead putting a bunch of women on display who are not named, short of you digging super deep into the posts and then eventually finding a tag of them on OnlyFans, if at all, from what I could gather, right? The only time that some of them are even mentioned, you got to dig deep to find them, right? So to make no mention of them, to thereby exploit them and their image, to perpetuate a standard that society finds agreeable and that is profitable, as we've well known, right? Without any recompense to himself, right? Not even a little bit. There's no backlash. And this is why I raised the issue of survival sex work earlier, because with people who are jumping into the pool and saying, this is easy, I can do it, right? The quote that I read from a well-established performer was, you can't unring that bell.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot. Just because you think you're nobody on the internet and you put this shit up and it maybe doesn't pan out, right? That doesn't make it go away just because you're just like, oh, I tried and it didn't work and I give up, right? It still exists. It will forever exist.
The internet never forgets.
And
it never forgives.
You know, and the sad fact is that the way that our society is set up, it could affect you later.
Mm-hmm.
Right? All because you thought that you were well equipped to handle the labor that other people are choosing either by pure agentic right because this is the work they want to be doing, or because other options are not nearly as accessible to them.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think those folks who jump into it like, oh yeah, so and so is cashing out on OnlyFans. Let me show the yiddies and it's gonna be cool. I think a lot of them fail to recognize how much of sex work is already subsistence sex work. You know what I'm saying? Like how many folks know what they're doing, are marketing themselves appropriately, or have like equipment and gear and things that polish their content, and are still not like for them, their work on OnlyFans is supplementary to another job by which they then are still struggling to meet their needs, right? There's this like illusion that OnlyFans is just hand over fist money. And I think part of that delusion is tied to the fact that we don't recognize sex work as work. That we just think like it is a public display of body parts. And that once you do that, it's just the money just falls from the sky like manna. I think folks are in for a rude ass awakening. You know, those who come in with that kind of energy, feeling like, well, I'm just gonna make my bread and it's gonna be whatever because it's like picking money off of a tree. They don't recognize how much work actually goes into this and how many content producers who do a really great job are still not cashing out, are not rolling in the loot, and it's supplementary to other forms of income that are likely also precarious.
And I think Tyga's actually just like really living by the playbook of these platforms where if you're not making a certain amount, right, then the precarity just continues to exacerbate itself. Because honestly, what I'm starting to realize is all subscription-based platforms or anyone that mediates gig work of any flavor where you are the product and you have to sell yourself in some capacity, be it driving people around, delivering food, whatever it's going to be, right? You're still the product. People may be buying other shit or buying shit through you, but you have to do the work, right? You are part and parcel of the product. And content creation and sex work are the penultimate versions of that. And Tyga's doing the exact same thing that the platforms would be doing. He's letting other people foot the bill and just scraping off the top, right? Like he's not operating his own camera. He's got a professional cameraman, woman, person, whoever is operating doing his visuals, right? He didn't learn shit about how to photo edit or lighting or anything that makes him look. Somebody's doing it, right? Then you have the people who are posting the shit for him, because again, he's not managing his own socials, right? Completely outside of the other models that are being featured into themselves, right? And this is exactly what the gig economy is doing. It's what platforms like OnlyFans do when they skim some off the top that models make, right? Because they're like, well, we gave you a space to operate, so you got to give us something. It's what the WWE is doing, by co-opting their performers' Twitch pages and saying, listen, we already own the licenses to everything about you, and you only work when you decide to work, and we don't control what happens to you on the job, right? We're just going to skim some more off the top because you're using your fame as a WWE personality to create other content. And we don't think that's fair that we're not getting a cut, right? And I saw it, and I was like, that's fucked up with WWE. But then I was like, wait a minute. Twitch has been doing that the whole time. The WWE was like, oh, y'all knew what to do. Let me just jump into the equation quickly and also skim some. Because Twitch does the same shit.
Yep.
Everyone is their own content producer who's giving the platform stuff. And the only way they can cash in is if people feed money back into the platform and run ads and all this other bullshit, and Twitch takes a little bit off the top. It is actually like the penultimate pyramid scheme, despite how much we hate and loathe the concept of pyramid schemes. They still exist. People still buy into them. This is just like the digital frontier of it. I'm just now realizing.
Yeah. And in Tyga's case, right? I mean, it's the Donald Trump playbook, right? He's realizing that in a moment where no one gives a shit about his music, where like being tied to the Kardashians is maybe not as lucrative as it used to be, right? He has a name, and the branding is what's going to generate him content. He inserts himself into OnlyFans as a middleman, and is going to make money, and he's going to make money on the backs of other people without ever having to do much of the work himself, other than branding, other than lending his name.
He's going to make money off porn, because porn is what the internet is all about. Doesn't matter what form it takes, because he's not actually doing anything sexual, really. It doesn't matter what it is. All of it's porn. Is the thing that I think people need to wrap their heads around. And I have been struggling to articulate theoretically in my own notes, like for my great academic work, what this thing is. But like, the internet just is porn. They are the same thing. They are the alpha and the omega of each other. Whether or not people want to admit it, everything that we do digitally is fucking pornographic.
The Ouroboros of the internet. Internet porn.
Quite literally. And so Tyga is just saying, like, I need to cash in. I need to use my name and find the niche of pornographic consumption that will work best for me. Even if it's not porn in the traditional sense, but it's very close to, because everyone wants to consume that content anyway.
And I think the with performers in WWE and fighters in the UFC, I mean, it just, I think what ties them to something like OnlyFans is that there's the performance, right? There's the veneer, right? Um, of the like curvy twerking girl next door who you are one tip away from, you know, fucking yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in WWE, right, that I mean it's all performative, right? It's always been a performance. Um, and and the house shows and that kind of stuff give you, right, this sense of proximity, of participating, right? And I imagine that WWE performers being on Twitch, right, does the same thing. It gives us a sense of proximity to these stars. And then in the case of the UFC, right, it's the only sport, the only major league sport, like major televised sport, where rookies could be below the poverty line.
Mm.
And I think, right, like a journeyman fighter needs to fight 10 times a year to make like 50, 60 grand, right? To be nominally middle class, right? They don't have insurance.
Mm-hmm.
What, less than 10 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago? No, less, definitely less. The UFC had their instituted their deal with Reebok so that their fighters had uniforms, so that they looked more like a conventional sporting
Yeah.
league. And with, I think, contractually, fighters get a percentage of the sales of their jerseys and their equipment.
Mm-hmm.
But they were no longer allowed to hang banners or wear patches with their sponsors. So there was an era in the UFC where a fighter would do their ring walk, and as Bruce Buffer was announcing them, they'd unfold this banner that had, maybe you were sponsored by Muscle Farm, and maybe you were sponsored by Hayabusa, and you would highlight your sponsors as you were gearing up to fight.
Right.
You got to figure that a bunch of fighters lost a ton of money when they were no longer allowed to promote their sponsors in the ring. And I think, and for me that's close to home because, my dad's a fighter, and that's a part of my life. But I think for me, it all three of those cases highlight that behind this veneer lies a really insidious and exploitative set of labor practices. And it speaks to where we are in this stage of capitalism, where everybody's an independent contractor, where so much of the work people do these days is independent contract work. Right. And I think it says, I mean, there's so much we could say about these sports teams and these platforms, but I think when we zoom out, when we look at them at aggregate, what we see is actually, I think, a really damning portrait of, one, contemporary American life, but two, how much this phase of capitalism suspends many of us at the very edges of subsistence. Right, the things that we have to endure and the extremes we have to go to pay rent.
Yeah, and Twitch is doing the exact same thing the UFC did. They did the exact same thing. There was a time, I believe, early last year when they changed their policy and made it so that streamers could not advertise specifically the platforms that had been attributed to marketing sex work. You could not link to your OnlyFans or your Patreon or your ManyVids on your Twitch page. You can blast every other flavor of of promo that you have, of any sponsor, that any G Fuel, NZXT, doesn't matter whatever gamer related product, or Amazon, obviously, because they own Twitch, right? If you want to shout out any of that stuff, perfectly fine, right? But that other income that may be benefiting from the double dipping of audiences, they were like, absolutely not. Those sponsorships, not allowed. You can't talk about them. There was a streamer actually who's sponsored by Adam and Eve, and she can't talk about it. She is a well-known partnered streamer, and she cannot talk about her Adam and Eve subscription on any of her streams. She cannot market it there because they're like, no, that is against the rules. We will not conflate work and sex. They are not the same thing. You cannot profit off the other one because the other one is just for fun behind closed doors where no one can bother you. We will never acquiesce to the idea that that is a profitable business model, right? Even if you're just fucking yourself. Because that is especially not okay, right? At bare minimum, it's got to be with another person in front of a camera with a bunch of sketchy, sweaty people in the room that make you uncomfortable and probably violate your rights, and then maybe you can get a small percentage of the profits. But if you dare to be alone in the comfort of your own home and choose to enjoy yourself and have other people pay you for that enjoyment, you are off your fucking rocker.
And I think it harkens back to like the fucking big ass incel energy of this fucking platform. Like I know that we're trying to like build something here, but that's just the truth, right? Like
no, you're right.
All of the discourse surrounding sex and Twitch is like driven by like little dick incel energy. That's just like fucking. I mean, the arguments are so numerous. They're even hard to replicate here, like off the cuff, and there is this like vitriolic, masculinist opposition, like violent opposition to the idea that women might make money off of their bodies on platforms like Twitch.
I'm gonna bring it full circle to our very first topic because of something I read today in my book, in talking about the depictions and historical representations of Native Americans. In 1504.
Can we get a page, bro? Come on.
Oh, dude, this is chapter 1, page 16 of this book. I just started it this week.
Okay.
In 1504, Amerigo Vespucci, the one whose name we use to come up with America, was quoted. He wrote down on paper, said the following: "For their women," talking about Native American women, "being very lustful, caused the private parts of their husbands to swell up to such a huge size that they appeared deformed and disgusting." In which I wrote in the margins, "jealous of BDE." Because if you don't think that this little dick incel energy doesn't extend all the way back to the founding of our country, you have not been paying attention.
So our first piece of merch is gonna be colonialism is little dick energy.
It's just gotta be a picture of Amerigo Vespucci and just in the Supreme font say incel. Or the first incel, or so, like something true, yeah, like really that's tasteful so of that flavor. Because like I literally wrote that in the marginalia today because it extends that far back. We have been so afraid of sexuality. I wasn't even going to get into the idea of like sexuality outside of a white woman's body or a white person's body, right? Which is a whole different can of worms. All of it extends back to a fear of sexuality outside of the control of a cis hetero white male body.
And I would add to that too, like not just like a fear of sexuality that exists outside of those bounds, but also then an inverted projection of that fear, right? Because while these pieces of shit are writing about like the swelling of indigenous dicks, they're also then rapaciously moving through the Americas, right? So it's like the rapaciousness and violence that they ascribe to indigenous and African bodies and indigenous and African sexuality is actually an inverted projection of the colonial project itself.
I think you're right, and what's crazy is that project has I think come to fruition in the selling of sex back to those people who spent so long historically constructing it as this deviant other. And now that it's come back to bite them in the ass, they're like, how the fuck did this happen? And it's like, you spent literally all of colonial history telling everyone that sexuality was bad, that it was deviant, that white woman's chastity had to be protected at all costs, that everybody else was a deformed, lustful, demonic sexual entity that needed to be controlled by a colonist agenda. And now you're mad that that's just being used against you when you helped to bring it to a place in our society where it is the one thing that everybody wants but can't have. And now that we're putting a price tag on it, you're like, fuck, I missed the boat on this one. But it's your own fault.
TLDR, colonization is little dick energy.
TLDR, if you want to get naked on the internet, please do it for your own good. If you're feeling that vibe, go ahead. Don't let nobody stop you.
Maybe. Well, you know what? Let me not expose myself.